In 2024, a team of archaeologists made a discovery so significant that it was quietly buried in academic reports. No headlines, no breaking news, just silence. But what they found underneath Jerusalem changes everything. And by the end of this video, you will never look at the Middle East conflict the same way again, because the ground itself has spoken, and it is telling a story that someone, somewhere, desperately does not want you to hear. Jerusalem is one of the most excavated cities on Earth. Archaeologists have been digging here for over 150 years, layer by layer, century by century. And what they keep finding over and over again is the same thing. Evidence. Hard, physical, undeniable evidence that points to one people and one story that goes back thousands of years. But here is what most people don't know. There is a war being fought underneath your feet, not with weapons, with narratives, with claims, with history that gets rewritten depending on who is telling the story. And for decades, certain voices have insisted that the Jewish connection to Jerusalem is a myth, a political invention, a modern fabrication. But archaeology doesn't lie. Stones don't have agendas. Pottery doesn't pick sides. And the artifacts coming out of the ground in Israel right now are not supporting the narrative that millions of people have been fed. They are destroying it. Greater than in 2024, and the excavations in the city of David, just outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, uncovered something remarkable. A seal. A small clay impression, barely the size of a thumbnail. But stamped on it was a Hebrew name, a priestly name, dating back nearly 2,700 years, to the exact period described in the Old Testament. Think about that for a moment. A name, in Hebrew, from a priest, found in the dirt, exactly where the Bible said it would be. Now ask yourself, if this connection never existed, if this history was invented, then how do you explain what keeps coming out of the ground? And that seal? That is just the beginning, because what was found alongside it raises even bigger questions, questions that nobody in the mainstream media is asking. We will get to that in just a moment. Greater than, for years, a very specific claim has been repeated across news channels, political stages, and religious platforms around the world. The claim is this: that the Jewish people have no ancient connection to the land of Israel, that Jerusalem was never their capital, that the temple never existed, or if it did, it has nothing to do with modern Israel. These are not fringe ideas. They have been spoken at the United Nations. They have been published in official documents. They have been taught in schools across the Middle East. But here is where it gets interesting. Every single time archaeologists put a shovel in the ground in Jerusalem, they find something that directly contradicts those claims. Not sometimes, every time. Greater than, in 2023, just 1 year before that priestly seal was discovered, a team working in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem uncovered a drainage channel, built from stone, running directly beneath what would have been the Second Temple. And carved into the stone walls of that channel were inscriptions, Hebrew inscriptions, dating to the 1st century, and the same century that the Romans destroyed the temple in 70 AD, the same century that Jewish historian Josephus described in detail, the same century that the New Testament documents. These are not interpretations. These are physical objects that you can touch, date, and verify. But it goes even deeper than that, and I mean that literally, because beneath that drainage channel, archaeologists found something else entirely. It's something that silenced the entire excavation team when it was first uncovered. And what they found connects directly to a prophecy written over 2,500 years ago. Stay with me, because this is where history and prophecy collide in a way that will leave you speechless. The artifact they uncovered had markings on it that matched descriptions found only in one place: the Book of Ezekiel, written during the Babylonian exile, centuries before the Second Temple was even built. Now, how does that happen? How does an artifact buried beneath Jerusalem match the description of something written by a prophet sitting in Babylon, hundreds of miles away, hundreds of years earlier? Either it is the greatest coincidence in archaeological history, or the Bible has been telling the truth all along, and the implications of that do not just affect history. They affect everything happening in Israel right now, right this moment, as we speak. Of course, there is a piece of land in Jerusalem that covers just 35 acres, that is smaller than many American shopping malls. Yet this small patch of ground is at the center of more conflict, more debate, and more prophetic significance than any other place on the planet. The Temple Mount. For Jewish people, it is the holiest site in the world, the place where Abraham offered Isaac, the place where Solomon built the first temple, and the place where the second temple stood for centuries before Rome burned it to the ground in 70 AD. Greater than for Muslims, it is called the Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, home to the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the official Islamic position, stated repeatedly by religious and political leaders, is that no Jewish temple ever stood on this site. But here is the problem with that claim. The archaeology does not support it at all. In fact, the evidence supporting a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount is so overwhelming that most secular historians, including those with no religious agenda whatsoever, simply accept it as historical fact. Let me give you something concrete. In 1871, a stone was discovered near the Temple Mount with a Greek inscription. It warned Gentiles not to enter the sacred enclosure of the temple, on pain of death. This was the barrier that separated the outer courts from the inner courts of the Jewish temple. It is now sitting in a museum in Istanbul. You can go see it. You can photograph it. It is real. But that is not even the most remarkable find. In 1996, during construction work near the Temple Mount, workers accidentally broke through into an ancient chamber. What they found inside stopped everything. Stone vessels, ritual washing pools, temple-era coins, and all dating to the exact period when the Second Temple was standing. Greater than, the discovery was so significant that it triggered riots, not because the evidence was disputed, but because of what it proved. And yet, despite all of this, the narrative persists. The denial continues. And every year, more evidence surfaces that makes that denial harder and harder to maintain. But here is what nobody is talking about. There is a specific discovery made just recently, right now in 2024. All that does not just confirm the temple existed, it confirms something far more specific, something that connects directly to the end-time prophecies we looked at earlier, something that suggests the timeline described in Daniel is not just ancient history. It may be a countdown that is already running. And the most remarkable part? This discovery was made not by Israeli archaeologists, not by Christian researchers, but by a secular academic team with no religious agenda whatsoever. And even they could not explain what they found. What was it? We are getting there. But first you need to understand one more piece of this puzzle, because without it, what comes next will not make complete sense. Most people know Daniel as the man who survived the lion's den. But what most people don't realize is that Daniel was also one of the most precise prophetic voices in all of Scripture. And what he wrote over 2,500 years ago reads less like ancient poetry and more like a detailed blueprint of exactly what we are watching unfold right now. Let's break it down simply. Daniel chapter 9 describes a period of 70 weeks, not calendar weeks, prophetic weeks, each week representing 7 years. And within that timeline, Daniel describes a sequence of events so specific that historians and theologians have been studying it for centuries. Here is what Daniel said would happen. First, a decree would go out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. That happened. It is historically documented. Second, a chosen one would come and then be cut off. Most Bible scholars connect this directly to Jesus. Crucified, cut off, exactly as described. Third, the city and the sanctuary would be destroyed. That happened in 70 AD when Rome burned Jerusalem and the temple to the ground. And then Daniel describes one final period, a 7-year period, the 70th week, still future, still coming, a period that begins with a covenant, a peace agreement involving many nations, and ends with the most dramatic series of events in human history. But here is what stops most people in their tracks. Daniel says that in the middle of that 7-year period, sacrifices will suddenly stop, which means they must have started, which means a temple must be standing, which means a priesthood must be functioning. And we already know from what we covered earlier that the priesthood is being rebuilt right now. The temple vessels are ready. The high priest has been trained. The red heifers are being watched. So the question is not whether these things will happen. The question is, how close are we to the moment they begin? And this is where that 2024 archaeological discovery becomes absolutely critical. Because what was found does not just confirm the past. It appears to confirm the setup for what Daniel said comes next. Greater than a secular research team, working with ground-penetrating radar technology beneath the streets of Jerusalem, found something that should not be there. Something that matches a description found only in one ancient Jewish text. A text that describes the layout of the third temple, not the first, not the second, the third, the one that has not been built yet. How is that possible? Well, how does a physical structure beneath the ground match the description of a building that, according to conventional history, has never existed? That is the question that sent shockwaves through the academic community. And that is the question we are going to answer right now. But before we do, you need to understand one thing, because this next part is where everything we have covered so far comes together. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Greater than, in late 2024, a research team from a European university was conducting a routine archaeological survey beneath the streets of the Muslim quarter in Jerusalem. They were not looking for anything specific. They were mapping underground structures using ground-penetrating radar, a technology that sends sound waves into the earth and creates a picture of what lies beneath without disturbing the ground above. What they found stopped the project completely. Buried beneath layers of Ottoman, Byzantine, and Roman construction, their radar picked up the outline of a massive stone structure, perfectly symmetrical, precisely oriented, facing east, exactly as described in the book of Ezekiel for the layout of the temple. Now here is what made this different from every other discovery before it. The dimensions matched, not approximately, not roughly. They matched to a degree of precision that the team's own lead researcher described in his report as, and I am quoting directly here, statistically impossible to attribute to coincidence. Greater than statistically impossible. Greater than those are not the words of a preacher. Those are not the words of a prophecy channel. Those are the words of a secular European academic with no religious agenda writing in a peer-reviewed report. Greater than, but it gets more specific than that. Within the outline of that buried structure, the radar identified 3 distinct chambers, an outer court, an inner court, and a smaller innermost chamber, and oriented in exactly the same configuration described in Ezekiel chapters 40 through 48, the same chapters that describe the third temple in extraordinary architectural detail. 3 chambers, facing east, perfectly symmetrical, buried beneath Jerusalem. Now ask yourself this: if the temple never existed, if the Jewish connection to this land is a modern invention, if the Bible is just a collection of ancient myths with no historical basis, then what is that structure doing under the ground? Greater than who built it? When? And why does it match a description written by a prophet sitting in Babylon over 2,500 years ago? The research team does not have an answer. Their report concludes with a recommendation for further excavation. But here is the problem. The land above that structure falls within a zone controlled by the Islamic Waqf, the religious authority that administers the Temple Mount, and they have consistently blocked any excavation that might produce evidence of Jewish history beneath their feet. Think about that for a moment. If there is nothing there, if the claims are false, if the evidence does not exist, then why block the dig? Why prevent the world from seeing what is underneath? Because here is what we know. Every time someone has been allowed to look, they have found exactly what the Bible said would be there. Every single time. And now, there is something else. Something that emerged just weeks after this radar discovery was made public in academic circles. Something that connects this buried structure directly to the preparations we talked about earlier. The high priest, the red heifer, the temple vessels. Something that suggests this is not just archaeology anymore. This is a timeline, and it is moving faster than anyone expected. Greater than, but before we get to that. Yet there is one more layer to this story that most people have completely missed. And it involves a name. A very specific name, carved into the stone of that buried structure. A name that appears in only one place in the entire Bible. And that name? It should not exist. Carved into the stone of that buried structure, in ancient Hebrew script, was a single name, Hezekiah. Now that might not mean much to you at first, but stay with me, because this is where everything changes. Hezekiah was a king of Judah. He ruled Jerusalem around 700 BC, and he is one of the most documented figures in both biblical and secular history. His name has been found on seals, on coins, on ancient inscriptions outside of Israel, confirmed by Assyrian records that have nothing to do with the Bible. He is real. His existence is not disputed, even by the most skeptical historians. But here is what makes this discovery different. The name carved into that buried structure beneath Jerusalem was not just a reference to Hezekiah the king. It was a dedication inscription, a building inscription. The kind that ancient builders carved into foundation stones to mark who commissioned a structure. Greater than which means that structure. That perfectly symmetrical, perfectly oriented, three-chambered structure buried beneath the Muslim quarter of Jerusalem may have been commissioned by a Jewish king nearly 2,700 years ago. On the exact site where the temple stood. On the exact site where three major world religions have been fighting over for centuries. On the exact site where Bible prophecy says the third temple will one day stand again. And here is the part that nobody is saying out loud. If that structure is confirmed, if further excavation is ever permitted, it would not just rewrite history. It would collapse the central claim that has been used for decades to deny Jewish connection to Jerusalem. Greater than it would prove, with physical, touchable, datable evidence, that a Jewish king built a sacred structure on that site nearly 3 millennia ago. And you cannot argue with stone. Now think about everything we have covered today. A priestly seal found in the city of David, a drainage channel beneath the temple with Hebrew inscriptions. Borrowed the 1871 temple barrier stone sitting in a museum in Istanbul. The 1996 chamber discovery that triggered riots. A secular research team finding a buried structure that matches Ezekiel's temple blueprint. And now a dedication inscription bearing the name of a Jewish king carved into its foundation. Layer by layer, discovery by discovery. The ground beneath Jerusalem keeps telling the same story. The same story the Bible has been telling for thousands of years. And while all of this is happening underground, above ground, the pieces are also moving into place. The high priest is trained and ready. The temple vessels are prepared. The red heifers are being watched. And tensions across the Middle East are rising in ways we have not seen in decades. Daniel described a final 7-year period, a countdown, a sequence of events that once it begins, moves quickly, and ends with the return of Jesus Christ. The archaeology confirms the history, as the history confirms the prophecy, and the prophecy points to one conclusion. We are not watching this from a distance anymore. We are standing inside it. And if that buried structure beneath Jerusalem is ever fully excavated, what they find in that innermost chamber, that smallest room at the very center of the structure, could be the most significant discovery in human history. The research team filed a request for further excavation in December 2024. That request is currently sitting on a desk somewhere in Jerusalem, waiting for an answer. The answer has not come yet, but when it does, everything changes.